We had a Rappaport lecture here last night named for the late Henry Rappaport. And Henry Rappaport used to love to tell the joke about the bus driver who was talking to a rabbi, and he said, "You got to tell me what your secret is." And the rabbi said, "What are you talking about?" And the bus driver said, "You clearly have a secret for how to get people to move to the back. And I need to know how to do that," right? So that was Henry Rappaport's joke. So I'm appealing to you and pleading to you to maybe move forward. What happens, people have flights, they have things, it is no indication of how important the session is, but it's inevitable that we thin out a little at the end, unfortunately. So please, create a little more community here by moving forward. How's that? Good. Okay. Great. Okay, something I thought to say at the very end, but again, at the end, people may have things to, so let me just say this right now. I'm speaking for myself, I hope I'm speaking for many others. I've had the sense that from the last 2 days that if we could take all of the participants and all of the people who have been involved and all the people who have shared their wisdom and their experiences with us, and we could clone them all and kind of fill the earth with them, this would be an entirely different world and an entirely different planet that we're living in. Because we not only were treated to wonderful scholarship and insight and wisdom and experience, but people were just like mentioned, right? It was a kind of a seminar in the dignity of being human. So I think we should all be extremely grateful. And I'm going to add to that I hope, and I'm speaking here for everybody, but including people who are here still who are presenters and who did us, and I hope to themselves, the kindness of being with us as much as possible, not only in their own sessions. I hope that many acquaintances and friendships and collaborations have resulted from these 2 days and will yet result as we figure out the best ways to use this gold mine that we are now sitting on with the recordings of all of these sessions. So if you haven't already, remember who was here, reach out to them and create the kind of networking that was really our intention in trying to uplift a very different, more humane kind of religious voice in this country that may, please God, have an effect on the world that we live in. So it is my happy task to introduce the people who will be in conversation, and they are amongst the most important people here in this community. The Reverend Dr. Serene Jones, all the way on my right, is the 16th president of the first woman to head Union Theological Seminary, which at 186 years is exactly, is that 186? Is that right? I'm sorry? 189 years. I got the 6 and the 9 upside down, right? At 189 years, it is exactly 50 years older than its younger sister here, JTS. She occupies the Johnston Family Chair for Religion and Democracy at UTS, is a past president of the American Academy of Religion, which annually hosts the world's largest gathering of scholars of religion. She was previously professor of theology at the Yale University Divinity School and chair of Yale University's program in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, the author of several books, including Trauma and Grace, and most recently her memoir, Call It Grace, Finding Meaning in a Fractured World. It's a privilege to have her participating in this closing panel of our convening. Dr. Shuly Rubin Schwartz is the first woman to head JTS as its 8th chancellor. She is, as you know, a groundbreaking scholar of American Jewish history, the Irving Lehrman Research Professor of American Jewish History. Among her publications, is the award-winning book, The Rabbi's Wife, a penetrating examination of the role of rabbis' wives in the development of American Jewish life. She has played many central roles in shaping and strengthening JTS's academic programs for 25 years. From 1993 to 2018, she served as Dean of the Albert A. List College of Jewish Studies. And in 2010, she also took on the deanship of the Gershon Keck Graduate School. And through it all, to this day, she has taught and mentored countless numbers of students. And they will be in conversation with Dr. Arnold Eisen, who is a Chancellor Emeritus of JTS, Professor of Jewish Thought. During his tenure as Chancellor, he transformed the education of religious, pedagogical, professional, and lay leaders for North American Jewry, with a focus on graduating highly skilled, innovative leaders who would bring Judaism alive. He is the author most recently of Seeking the Hiding God, a personal theological essay, and among his other works are Galut and The Jew Within, Self, Family, and Community in America. I should note that the beautiful campus, about which I have gotten such wonderful comments from so many people, that campus in which we are meeting was the renewal of that campus was a project that he launched, and it has delivered on its promise to foster an innovative learning and teaching and a deep sense of community, some of which we have experienced just in these last 36 hours. So, Arnie.
Thank you, Gordon. So, before I turn to Shuly and Serene with several questions, and then our plan is to open it up to your questions and comments before the session concludes, let me say the three of us are aware that in 2025, we are exactly 60 years after Heschel's groundbreaking, brilliant speech at the Union Theological Seminary on interfaith cooperation, much more than tolerance, much more even than mutual respect, but actual cooperation. And that speech, of course, was called No Religion is an Island. And I thought I would begin by just recalling three short sentences. Heschel, you know, wrote in little gems. You don't read Heschel in pages or sometimes even in paragraphs. You read him in sentences. So here are three sentences which to me are essential to what we've been about in these last 2 days. I share Gordon's sentiment that those of us who have been here these 2 days have been part of discussion which is intellectually rigorous and well-informed, but also heartfelt and also soul-searching and honest. Here's Heschel. He began, you may remember, I speak as a person who is often afraid and terribly alarmed lest God has turned away from us in disgust. The supreme issue is today whether we are alive or dead to the challenge and the expectation of the living God. The crisis engulfs all of us. The misery and fear of alienation from God make Jew and Christian cry together. And Heschel went on to argue in the essay that this situation outweighed any differences between our traditions, whether in teaching or creed or observance or history, and that we must not allow these differences to stand in the way of respect and cooperation. He said, we fail to realize that while different exponents of faith in the world of religion can continue to be wary of the ecumenical movement, there is another ecumenical movement worldwide in extent and influence, nihilism. We must choose between interfaith and internihilism. I have to say that sometimes when I read this essay or other things by Heschel, I think he's guilty of prophetic hyperbole. He exaggerates, but not here. I think what we've been made more aware of the last 2 days, if we needed more awareness of it, is how serious things are and how many and deep are the injuries to human dignity that are transpiring everywhere in the world and within several blocks of where we're sitting right now. So I'm going to turn to Shuly and ask her a question, and I can't ask Serene the exact same question because Serene has not been here, because Serene has been in Brazil at the International Climate Conference. And so I'm going to ask Shuly first, who has been here sitting in the front row for the last 2 days, what stands out in your mind, what you've learned in the last 2 days that you're going to carry away with you? And I'm going to ask Serene what you learned about injuries to human dignity or restoration of human dignity at the climate conference in Brazil. So Shuly, why don't you begin?
Sure, thank you. Look, I think we all learned so much, and I just, I'm sure I speak for everyone in saying that we can't thank enough both Rabbi Gordon Tucker and Dr. Tamara Newman for conceptualizing this conference so broadly and so deeply, and for bringing together so many of you to share your expertise. Our thinking was, of course, that human dignity is an issue that permeates every facet of our lives. And so each of these sessions really focused deeply on a specific area. Probably you had to narrow it down to fit into the 2 days, and there were many other sessions we could have had. So the convening itself with all of the sessions just showed the breadth and the depth of this issue and of the potential injury to human dignity on so many different levels. It also showed, as we heard, both from Venerable Bodhi and from Dr. Hirschach, as Venerable Bodhi put it, all life is interconnected and interdependent. We learned how important it is for the basic opportunity to deal with anything in terms of relating to others around human dignity begins and ends with respect for another person, for humanity. And that interconnectedness was very much tied. This was, I would say, my biggest revelation here. We all came here concerned about the future of democracy, but 3 of our speakers connected the dots specifically. The relationship between human dignity and democracy. First, Shai held, and I would say we just heard Timothy Beale again similarly, focused on the creation story and the contrast with the Tower of Babel story. Shai held talked about what it means to be created b'Tselem Elohim in God's image, and talked about the fact that being created as the divine image democratizes moral responsibility, so that all of us are responsible for the vulnerable in society. Senator Coons, same thing. Democracy is an exercise in upholding human dignity, he said. And then in the evening, Bill McKibben addressed climate change by talking about, he gave us a lot of hope in talking about solar power and how increasing access to solar power will enhance human dignity because it will be available to all of us, and this access will foster democracy. So those were dots that were connected that were very powerful and moving to me.
Serene, want to tell us about Brazil?
So thank you, Shuly, and it's wonderful to be up here with both of you. And before I jump in to Brazil, I want to just tell a quick story that is a testimony to how important a convening like this is in terms of the consequences we may not see in the moment, but the long-term consequences. It was probably my second year as president of Union, and I was invited to a conference at JTS hosted by Chancellor Eisen, and it was a conference on Jewish-Muslim relations and theology. And Arnie and myself and Sherman Jackson were on a panel together. It was a rich conversation over 2 days, and I left that conversation just completely convinced that the first thing I needed to do at Union that would be breaking with the mold was we needed to hire a professor of Islam who was Muslim. And I went back, went through it with my board, and we hired Jerusa Lamptey, Jerusa Rhodes, who was here with you all yesterday. That then led to opening the field of Buddhist studies at Union, hired Greg Schneider. We brought on John Tatamanal, who studies interreligious engagement. And finally, most recently, Simranjit Singh, who's sick. We now have an entire field of interreligious engagement that began in this room. It didn't look like this. It was actually, it's been quite it didn't exist, but it was in the space that was this room before. And little could I have seen that at JTS would come the beginning of a whole new phase of life at Union Theological Seminary. And of course, added to that is the long-term partnership that our two schools have shared for so long. And I recall, as Chancellor Eisen, Emeritus, refers to Heschel's "No Religion is an Island," a conversation we had on the anniversary of that stunning article, conversation before our Board of Trustees, and my being with the Board of Trustees here at JTS. And then how wonderful it's now been to be in conversation with Shuly, and it wasn't mentioned, but we also share the fact that we are about to enter our last semesters. We're both the first women in these roles, entering our last semester in these roles. So it's also the case of, among the many things that these two schools have shared, is we both re-envisioned our physical space at the same time, and we know that envisioning and changing physical space affects how you learn and teach together. I could go on and on and on about the importance of this relationship, and maybe we'll come back to that at the end, but pardon? And then I'm going to come to Brazil. Yes, so I have not been able to attend the conference because I've been in Brazil. I've been in Rio and Sao Paulo. I was supposed to go up to Lehrman, to the area of COP30. If you all have been watching the news, you know that COP30 has turned into quite an event. The Amazonian tribes have collectively organized and come into the COP area and tried to move into the blue zone. So they've stopped letting people come, and the blue zone is the place where the major conversations are happening. I was associated with COP30 because at Union we have a center called the Center for Earth Ethics, and that is run by Corinna Gore, who was appointed. The COPs have divided the world into 5 regions that attempt to bring voices that are not heard at the table of the grand ecological discussions to the table, the marginalized communities, the communities that are most affected and impacted by climate change. And Corinna was appointed the head of North America, running from Greenland to Mexico, and Corinna's work has also always been deeply invested in indigenous voices. So it's been quite an experience to be a person deeply invested in indigenous voices in North America during the most recent part of COP30 that took place in New York a month ago. Under Corinna's leadership, COP began what is called an ethical stocktake. And behind the idea of an ethical stocktake that would take place in each of the 5 regions, with all of the people from the other 4 regions coming there, was the, I think, very simple and obvious, but not so clear vision that until we address climate issues at a spiritual level and at an ethical level, until we begin to see it as a major ethical problem and not just a question of are we going to survive as a species, which is an ethical issue, but that the spiritual dimensions of it from all perspectives. So hence began for the first time an ethical stocktake, a very important move forward in the climate conversation. And in the middle of that conversation, I will just pause here to tell one powerful story that came from that, which is pertinent to my time in Brazil. During the ethical stocktake, which took place at the Natural History Museum in New York City a month ago, the Lenape tribe constructed a teepee in the middle of Union's courtyard and built a fire that was burning throughout the ethical stocktake 24 hours a day. And throughout the time it was there, people could come and go. The teepee was 40 feet tall, so it took up most of our courtyard. But it was so moving to have indigenous people, particularly from New York State, and particularly the Lenape, walk into the tent and sit down and just begin to weep and to bawl, to cry deeply, saying, we never imagined in our lifetimes that we would sit at a sacred fire in a teepee on the island of Manhattan. Just think about that. And talk about human dignity and the forms of repair that are not immediately obvious to us, but are deeply spiritual and spatial and deeply sacred. So I will go quickly, but COP 30, I was there, and in Rio, I was part of something called the Lumisphere, which is a installation which is a combination of AI and artists working to create an immersive experience in which you can use the imagination as a lever to imagine a future that exists outside of the boxes that we presently have in our own imaginations as to what the future always ends up looking like, something extended from what we know. And how do we get beyond what we know to what could be? And I'll just end this by saying 3 takeaways that I came back from Brazil with is first, when almost a third of your country is the Amazon, and literally referred to as the lungs of the world, the entirety of Brazil is impacted by the presence of the Amazon. And so this Amazonian uprising of the tribes against COP 30 was felt throughout the entire country. One of the impacts of having the Amazon there and the history of Brazil, which I was reminded is the size of the United States, was that the Amazon has made it so that the question of human dignity is not just a question of the human, but is the question of the human dignity in relation to animal dignity, in relation, as I'm sure Bill talked about last night, in relation to the dignity of earth and plants, and what does it mean to think about all of those in the terms of dignity, or is dignity the right term to use for that? And then that leads to the questions of boundaries and borders, and how we divide up thought and even our understanding of what the human is in the word human dignity. And then the last thing I'll share is, as I was leaving Sao Paulo, you could look back at the city, and we knew this was coming, but smoke was rising everywhere because massive riots were breaking out in the streets because of what was happening at COP30, the whole people's movement across Brazil was rising up. This doesn't make it into the news in the U.S., but Sao Paulo is divided, is a city that has at its center 4 quarters where the wealthy live, and the walls are 20 feet tall, and they're circled by armed guards, and you do all of your living within these quarters. And then the great mass of the rest of Sao Paulo, which is one of the largest cities in the world, is just unrelenting poverty. And this is supposedly a democracy. You mention the word democracy and people shrug their shoulders and say it's all corrupt. And being in that place and being in the United States at this point in time, I was just made uncomfortably aware of how close that reality is to our own reality. If you particularly look at issues of poverty and how we divide and build borders and think about human dignity, it's just a foot away from in a place, and you can always see it in places different from your own, so much more starkly than you can in your own context. So Brazil awakened my appreciation for the democracy we do have and how important it is, particularly with respect, I think the notion of human dignity is the foundation of democracy, that we struggle to protect and preserve this because it is so fragile.
So one of the things that I was struck by repeatedly in the last 2 days was our intuition was correct that this conference should be an interreligious convening. We shouldn't just be talking to Jews here at JTS as we often do. That our sense of responsibility to God mandates us to talk to other people whose relationship to God is not exactly the same as ours is. Very much in line with what Heschel was saying. So Shuly and Serene, let's reflect for a minute about why the work of respecting human beings and restoring preparing the injuries to human dignity, why this work has to be done through religions working together. Why do religious communities have to work together? And why is that an instrument that has largely been untapped, I think, in the world for fighting the various things that we're trying to fight, climate change or poverty or whatever? How are we going to take more advantage of this? Shuly, you want to talk about that first?
Yeah. Look, we've heard so much about what it means for people of faith to come together, to share that sense of urgency and responsibility, to tackle the challenges to human dignity all around us. I think we all know that none of us has the answers. And with everything being as urgent as it is, we must. It is an imperative to come together, to learn from one another, to amplify our voices by working together. I'll just quote a little bit from Heschel, too, from that same article, since I think it inspired all of us in preparation for this. Heschel wrote, in that no religion is an island, the voice of God reaches the spirit of man in a variety of ways, in a multiplicity of languages. One truth comes to expression in many ways of understanding. So the more ways that we bring together, the more opportunity we have to figure out what our strategy might be moving forward. Look, I also think that this work requires a principled pluralism, not just more voices is better, but recognizing what Heschel said and internalizing it. And that is certainly what we at JTS have always believed so deeply in, that true pluralism comes from a place of deep religious faith that we each bring to our work, and that enriches everything that we do. Look, we haven't said it much during this conference, but I think one of the other reasons that it felt so important to us for this to be an interfaith gathering is that religion is being used disingenuously. It has been weaponized in this country to justify immoral actions. Marginalized people have been treated without the dignity that they deserve. And in Jewish parlance, that's a Chilul Hashem. It is a desecration of God's name. And this was also a way for us to reclaim a way of speaking about this as people of faith, who are, in addition to being concerned about the issue, are horrified by the way religion is being manipulated by others.
So I'll jump in here with more Heschel quotes from that article. You guys just might go home and read it tonight, because or you don't even need to read it because you'll probably hear most of it here. So one of the most radical statements that Heschel makes, and for me it was just like, as I was rereading it, I was like, oh, wow. He says, religion is never an end in itself. It is a means to human flourishing. And Heschel had this amazing sense that our religious traditions don't exist just as like pretty objects sitting on a table so we can admire them. They actually exist for the purpose of promoting human dignity, or to use his language, human flourishing. And if we treat them as ends in themselves, that's when they become weapons, because they become objects that we can manipulate and throw around. And it's in the interreligious conversation that shared goal of human flourishing can come forward. And we need to remind each other of those moments when we make of our own religion an end in itself. I mean, we need to hold each other accountable. He has wonderful discussion on anti-Semitism. He says to be anti-Semitic is to be anti-Christian, and to be anti-Christian is to be anti-Semitic. He says, and those two accountabilities have to stand there together. Because neither religion can be itself without the other. It simply cannot exist to do its work in the world. So it's not even in one sense, it's a demand that we do this together. It is a choice to concede to the demand, but the demand precedes our choice. So, yes, or should, yes.
And there are voices inside our two traditions and inside every other one saying this can't be done, that religions are inevitably at odds with one another, that religion is always going to be a source of intolerance and hatred and oppression and bigotry, and can never be a source of love and cooperation and respect. And we can't prove them wrong if we're just working with people inside our own tradition. We need people from other traditions who are working with us. And I'm often struck that sometimes these abstract philosophical ideas that we have in our heads really play themselves out. And one of the abstract philosophical ideas that's playing itself out to pernicious effect in America is that pluralism is the same as relativism. That to say that you don't have the whole truth is to say that nobody has any truth and everybody, and you can't stand for anything. And this is so horrible because I find people, Jews saying this, that God says this, and if we start disagreeing about what God says, then it's all, then it's nihilism. We might as well give up. So I find that I need experiences like these 2 days to remind me that all of us are doing the same things. We're finding ways of speaking in the name of our tradition, knowing that other people are going to speak differently, right? And this, if I could just tell this one story, interjecting here with my Heschel stories. So the one time I met Heschel, I with great chutzpah at the age of 20, asked him what gave him the right to say in God in Search of Man that religion had become irrelevant, oppressive, insipid, and dull. And he said, as a response, well, President Nixon thinks the war in Vietnam is fine. I think the war in Vietnam is evil. And I said, yes, what gives you the right to say the war in Vietnam is evil? And then he said something to me that I'll never forget, more or less in these words, that I am the heir to a great religious tradition, and as such, it is not only my right, it is my duty. It is my duty to speak in its name as best I can, knowing that other people are going to speak differently. And I found that that's what we were doing here the last 2 days. We weren't simply making nice, we were speaking seriously from our traditions, addressing serious issues.
Yeah. The one other thing I would add that we heard many times over these past few days is that the other reason we need to work together is the importance of this religious sensibility to the public square, right, to the common good, that we all need to bring these values to bear on our society around us.
So how are we going to make this part of the theological education or the religious formation of those we are training to be religious leaders? Serene, you've now spent, 18 years, yes? And that has been your mission, to change the way that we do theological education and clergy formation. How does this interfaith effort bear on that, or vice versa?
Well, I have Mary Boyce sitting right here who could probably report on whether or not I have a good answer to this or not. So Mary, you could jump in here too. Or Carissa, a recent graduate also. First of all, as we've been reflecting on what this means for theological education, to have built into the very structure of the education an interreligious component, we decided from the beginning that what would bring us together would be a focus not first on the doctrines of the religions and then move down from that, but rather, and that's why we use the word interreligious engagement, to start with the forms of life and practices that different religions cultivate, which gives ample ground for us to think about what theological education is as a place of cultivation of practices and forms of life. And tied to that are forms of intellectual practice that we teach, but that formation in theological education includes the other as well. And the other, I think, is the one that is perhaps most sustaining over the long haul, and yet the hardest to put your finger on how you cultivate it. Learning other religious practices, it can do one of two things. It can enhance your own practice because you can see from Buddhist meditation what has been missing for so long from parts of Christian prayer practice. So, that's a deeply important part of that theological education that came from an interreligious part. But secondly, you also become aware of the differences, which helps you articulate the content of what you do believe by encountering something that is different from what you believe. And one moment I'll lift up in that regard for this kind of stunning moment for theological education, founded as a Protestant seminary. Union has always been social activism, make the world better, move towards the future. The faculty was having a conversation about what our topic was going to be for the year that we were going to discuss, and we said, let's devote this year to hope. And the Buddhist and the Buddhist and the Hindu professor sitting in the corner said, if you want to make an interreligious conversation, we can't do hope. Hope is not a concept in Buddhism. And it was like, do you remember that, Mary, that moment? I mean, it was just sort of like a stunning kind of recognition that hope is not just a kind of natural human impulse, it's actually something that's been part and parcel of the blood that has coursed through the veins of the Abrahamic traditions. So we didn't do hope that year, but so I'm just giving those as examples. But I think the biggest example I'll say is that what runs through all the traditions is a sense of shared humility and contrition. And if you don't approach this with humility about the failures to do it well, because we're doing it in a Protestant context, which has been the dominant religion that has been thus afforded the inability to see its own edges. So we have, as a historically Protestant seminary, the privilege of being surprised by the other rather than having been the other.
Well, one of the things we talked a lot about in the last 2 days was how all our traditions play a good game of speaking in the name of humility and tolerance and respect, and doing exactly the opposite in practice with triumphalism and persecution and prejudice, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that part of this, part of our challenge in theological education is to help students learn how to use religious language, to feel comfortable using religious language, to talk about empathy, humility, compassion, to a public that's really wary of hearing about that for all the reasons that you just mentioned. And I think that is one of the challenges of educating the next generation of leaders, lifting up the power of interreligious learning. I can't not mention the privilege I've had to teach for almost a decade with Professor Mary Boyes, who's here, where our classes included students from both our schools, and really all of the assignments we gave ensured that they were working together on group assignments. And so it's not only about being exposed to other traditions, but it is actually learning about the other in the presence of the other. And certainly for Jewish-Christian relations, that is a painful experience on both sides. And it was always an awe-inspiring experience to be in the presence of students who struggled and worked hard and developed deep relationships with one another. And there's no question that their ministries, in whatever form, ministries, rabbinates, whatever form it takes, will be richer for that experience.
And I think one thing that's very interesting, and I did make it for the part of the last conversation, and this goes back again to Heschel, his statement about, we need to be interreligious or else we become internihilist. We're now at a point where that internihilist reality is actually inside of all of us. And our students come with that inside of them. Our faculty have it inside of them. And so the art of teaching to the internihilist that we cannot escape, and yet we have to engage in a way that opens up the imagination to other ways of existing. I mean, it really is a huge act of imagination to enter into theological education in this culture at this time and place.
That's great. And I'll just lift up something that Rabbi Cohen mentioned in an earlier session, and Reverend Thomas, where they talked about the responsibility of teaching joy, the joy in our traditions and seeing joy as an act of resistance and a tool of resilience. And we can forget that, given all the challenges that we face, and that's also part of our responsibility.
I think, Gordon, now's the time that we should open the floor for discussion. Is there a microphone that's going to go around? Would someone like to make a comment or ask a question? The mic will come to you. Worn down by 2 days of discussion. Come on. No one wants.
You know, the first thing that we learn as teachers is 10 seconds of silence feels like 10 years.
I've just been taught.
Very touching, beautiful sharing. I think one of the things, the more I'm involved in interreligious dialogue and sharing and working on projects together is, and it was a little bit what you brought up in terms of hope, no hope. We're working out of our American competitive mindset. They have to accept a kind of win and lose. I mean, we're not all going to agree on this is the priority of the project that must be done today, but you want to support each other in the project. So I just thought you could comment on this democratic challenge to interfaith and requiring a sense of winning and losing, at least in terms of the way our culture names things. I guess you would just say give or surrender to might be a more religious sense, support and surrender, but along that lines, if you would comment on that.
I think that for me, what is so beautiful about Pope Francis's encyclical about climate change was exactly that. He said it's not a matter just of carbon and stuff like that. It's a matter of human beings changing their attitude toward our right to rule everything in the world and take charge of everything and control everything, right? And so it's a different mindset, and people are walking around, I think, with that mindset about religion and about God. Like, God is supposed to be a tyrant. God is supposed to be like an all-powerful, and the fact that there's all these divergences and stuff makes it much more complicated. And so it gets to the bottom of how we're thinking about divinity and about humanity.
Yes.
Yeah. But he asked you the question.
I understood your response. I'm not quite sure I understood your question.
In other words, we're not always going to be in agreement on how to enter into an issue or how we prioritize our issues. So, for example, I'm sure your faculty felt it's great enthusiasm, hope. Yeah, hope it is. And they had to stand back. They had to rework. They had to, in a sense, they had to surrender hope. Mm-hmm. They had to say, no, I'm giving up or I'm sacrificing hope in order to do something. So I was interested in, as you were saying about what Francis was saying, is, yeah, we might want to change this factory, but also we can't do it today because it's impacting the employees who are very poor at this factory. So that's the dynamic I'm just inviting you to share a little bit on your experiences of giving up, in a sense, in order to persevere. Mm-hmm. That paradox, finding the paradox that's in us and in the situation of interreligious engagement. Does that help?
Yeah, no, thank you. I just go back to what Arnie said. I do think that what Pope Francis says about the environment and giving up this understanding of human beings as dominating and controlling, I think you can't really enter into earnest, even intra-religious conversation, much less inter-religious conversation, without giving up not just a small amount, a large amount of control. But that's at the heart of faith, is to recognize that you don't own yourself. You aren't in control. I mean, that's not to say that you need to have a controlling God, but that the mystery of it all, we are extrinsically defined and claimed. We are claimed by something outside of ourselves. Does that help by that?
Yeah, I guess so.
That's the theology of it.
And I guess I understand it more, less of a surrender and more of just entering into those conversations with a sense of vulnerability, rather than here I am, here's my stance, and I'll listen to yours, but and I think that's a prerequisite for any meaningful
But what's so
dialogue.
interesting about doing it as an interreligious or intra or inter versus having other conversations around differences, the ability to let go of control is supported by being held in a tradition. I mean, you can let go more once you understand the depths of being held.
Right. If you're
And
rooted in-
held by generations
Yep.
before you and to come.
Hi, first of all, thank you for a truly wonderful 2 days. This has been a gift to those of us who were lucky enough to be here. I'm here because I was introduced to Gordon Tucker and Amy by a late friend and predecessor of Serene, Dr. Donald Shriver, who would have loved to be here and would have loved to have heard about the emphasis on conversation and dialogue. And my question to you is, it's certainly wonderful to have conversation and dialogue among thinkers and religious leaders, etc. How might we go about having dialogue and conversation between congregations rather in addition to just leaders?
Well, I think, if I may, I'm very mindful of the moment in which this conversation is taking place. And being heads of institutions on Morningside Heights in 2025. And I think it bears saying out loud that many institutions of higher learning around the country have been struggling over these past few years with their moral compass. And I think the role of faith-based institutions has become all the more important in this moment. So one of the things that I have been striving to do over the past few years is outreach in that direction to, there are lots of institutions of higher learning in New York City, to reach out to many of those institutions that really are struggling. And these are challenges that these challenges like at least a generation in the making that came to a head, and October 7 was a spark, but certainly not, it was only a spark for something that was much larger. In terms of what's higher education about? What's the goal? What is the goal of educating young people in the arts and sciences? And that used to be much clearer. And so to really, for me, part of that outreach is to heads of institutions like that, to help them think through what does it mean to navigate those issues and to reclaim the sense of purpose and educating in service of the moral good.
So I think, John, that's such a good question, and I have to always remind myself this as the president of a seminary is what our mission is, and is to form and shape leaders who can be part of and lead alongside and with communities that can have that conversation. And the community of Union and of JTS is itself it is a microcosm of what we're trying to help them understand how to do. But it's hard as a seminary itself to do both that and be the convener of the religious communities in their broader form. We can do it in this kind of context, but hopefully we're preparing leaders that are bringing communities into conversation with each other, or at least beginning to identify why those conversations aren't happening. Also, I have become less enamored of the word dialogue. I think conversation is a good word, but there's a way in which and maybe this has been said a lot in the conference, probably has, but the interreligious dialogue seems to suggest that just having the conversation is sufficient. And at least this goes back to your question about what we've learned at Union, is that it's not just, the conversation is mightily important, but it's also what it enables you to do together that increases the possibility of human flourishing. So it's not just the conversation, it's the action enabled by the conversation, the collective action.
And I think that was what was distinctive. It struck me in the last couple of days. We weren't talking about Judaism and Christianity and Buddhism and Islam. We were having people of those traditions coming out of those traditions address issues which are facing all of us.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be really valuable.
Yeah.
We have time for one more quick question, if it's really quick. Because I want to give each of our...
I'm just going to make a comment related to that. You will know that a very revered religious leader in the Orthodox Jewish community, no longer with us, kind of famously said years ago, I'm all in favor of interreligious conversation dialogue, but not on theological issues. We should only talk about, the good that we can do in the world, but, talking about theology has to be off the table. And as brilliant as he was and as revered as he was, he got it 100% wrong. That the real power of this, and we saw it in these 2 days, how many of the speakers, spoke from their theological commitments and invited us into those commitments. This was a way of reminding us of this pluralism, which is not relativism, of understanding, trying to understand what God wants of us, what it means to be devoted to God's children, which is all of creation, and the idea that we should all cultivate all the time, that we absolutely do not have the whole truth, because as soon as we believe that, we are committing idolatry.
A last word, Serene?
I could talk about idolatry. That's a whole conference right there, the idols that we have. I do think that last word is an image that someone shared in Brazil about the time they understand themselves as going through, and it's a common image. It's the chrysalis of when the caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it gets liquefied in the cocoon. It literally dissolves. But there's memory in the cells as it reconfigures. And I do think that because of the magnitude of the suffering that we face and the collapse globally, and because of the coming together of multiple traditions of moral conviction and spiritual insight, we are in that liquefied state, and that it's up to us to not make the butterfly, because I don't know what that butterfly is going to look like. But there is a butterfly that is coming out of this chrysalis that we find ourselves collectively in, with different memories of cells.
Let's hope.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
But you hope. I hope.
Okay.
You may not hope.
Yep. So I'm going to end with that hope. We covered so many issues, so many challenges to human dignity in so many arenas, and the work is immense, and it could be easy to conclude that we are just naive to think that there's really anything that this will achieve. I think we Jews can never be naive about the depth of human depravity, of what humans are capable of. But I think we share that sense of hope, the sense of hope of what humanity, of the good that humanity is capable of. And it is that impulse that brought us together. And hopefully that we will take that. There's so many ways in which we've been inspired by what we've heard, and the people doing marvelous work in so many different fields, and take that with us as we continue our work, each in our respective arenas where we feel that we can make a difference. So thank you for making that possible.
Resides here on this campus, as in so many other religious traditions, gratitude is often expressed in a bracha, a blessing, a benediction. So here's one from ours. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shenatan mechochmato livnei adam. Blessed is the sovereign of the universe who has given of the divine wisdom to human beings. And that's the gratitude that we should all have for what we've experienced with one another here. And we send you all off with our blessings. Thank you.